For the last couple of weeks, my account has been suspended. I couldn't check my inbox, couldn't post videos, couldn't respond to or even post comments. YouTube decided to do this because someone flagged one of my videos as hate speech against women. The evidence showing that feminists are not interested in free speech has been made clear over and over again, and so it's not something I'm going to discuss right now. However, there should no longer be any debate or any kind of discourse as to whether feminists, and by feminists I mean the majority of women and the men that serve them, are interested in either a free exchange of ideas or in any type of equality that is mutually beneficial to both genders. I've said this before. This is a war in which the winning side can only be victorious when the losing side capitulates to unconditional surrender. What I mean to say is that although men did not ask for this gender war, although we didn't start this power struggle, we find ourselves in it, and that's where we are right now, like it or not. This is a battlefield for sexual and economic supremacy between men and women. That is the reality of the situation. Women did not possess the abilities to engineer such a destructive war, but men, as of right now, possess almost no ability to resist women. And that's why the war is so effective, because the weapons being used are women themselves, our biological kryptonite. The answer to this war lies in the weapon being used against us, which is once again women. Now, the entire time we've been trying to convince women of their wrongdoing, and these efforts are pointless. Women have been weaponized, and barring some drastic transformation of the masses of women, they can't help men fight against the forces that set them against us in the first place. Exceptions exist, and they always do when the norms are as dramatic as this. That doesn't change the status quo. Asking women to change is naive, and asking women to change is like asking bullets to not be so violent at high speeds when coming into contact with human flesh. If we take apart a bullet and observe the sum of its parts, we'll find lead, maybe some copper, some gunpowder, and all of these things are useful by themselves, but when arranged in just the right way and shot in your direction at the speed of sound from a gun muzzle, you can't extract any usefulness out of it. Your best bet is to avoid the bullet and start shooting back. So if men want to win this war, and I assure you that the consequences of losing are very grim, if we want to win this, then we have to arm ourselves with our own weapons. Not only that, we have to be able to defend against the constant attack on men within society. We need to develop Kevlar plating and armor because we're going directly into the line of fire. So first off, let's step back and view this from a gender-neutral perspective. Yes, we're men, but for the moment, view this from a perspective of a completely impartial and inanimate observer. Look at both men and women as nothing but foreign objects of study. As of right now, you belong to neither, just observe. And I ask that you do this only because some of the solutions I propose are directly oppositional to human male biological impulses that must be conquered and managed for men to move forward. Now ask yourselves, where is the nexus of female power? Currently, female power is derived through the offspring of men, their children, and their legacies, and females have control over the breeding process, and therefore ultimately have control over who is allowed to live or die, and also what men are allowed to pass on in the form of their legacy. That is immense power, and it must be taken away from women, and it must be controlled by men. It's that simple. Men must gain control over breeding. This will be achieved through surrogacy, specifically relatively wealthy men of the West taking advantage of international law to form mutually beneficial arrangements outside of the West with females that are willing to be paid in exchange for 9 months of labor, no pun intended. Paternity testing allows a man to erase any doubt that he will be getting his offspring from the trade-off, and for every man that does something like this, there will be one Western woman who will never get access to male wealth through child support. Now there's the issue of the fact that children generally do better in two-parent households, but remember that this is a reaction to a state of warfare where men were strong-armed by the state out of the lives of their children. Like I said before, this is a battle between men and women that men did not ask for. So it's either going to be men that have control over how their children are raised, or women, and there's no in between, and that is the fault of feminism, not the fault of men and their natural desire to procreate. If humanity really put so much importance on waiting for the ideal environment to breed, we would be extinct. The cost of breeding can be artificially inflated or pushed down, just like the cost of sex or any other biological male-female exchange. And we're going to do exactly that by avoiding breeding with women that have the power and the discretionary income to force us into their tilted playing field, namely that of the family courts of the West. Prostitution is another front in the gender war, namely because once again it holds the power to artificially inflate the value of a desired biological interaction between men and women. Now, the entire concept of marriage in the West revolves around prostitution, and it speaks to the power of male desire for the feminine, since men didn't have any major problems with Western marriage until women figured out that they could force the Johns to pay for their services no longer required at the expense of the Johns via divorce and alimony. We didn't have a problem with it simply because the prostitutes were giving us enough bang for our buck. That ends today, starting right now. Men must legalize prostitution to combat the prostitution of men by women and their pimp, also known as the state. Now, some of us consider prostitution to be immoral. Sure. But again, in any war, you may have to do immoral things to combat immorality. Remember also that a prostitute has a choice to sell herself. It is her decision. Men want sex from her, and she chooses to give it to them for an agreed-upon price. So our views of prostitution, whether they be approving or disapproving, are irrelevant, since it is a 100% voluntary and consensual act between two people. The female equivalent to prostitution is one where women want wealth from men and use the state after marriage to forcefully extract that wealth from a man that hasn't given his consent. Therefore, it is exponentially more immoral to enforce alimony on men than it is to engage in the consensual act of prostitution. It must be legalized in order to combat a much greater immorality and injustice. Personally, I'll never pay for sex, but I'm not going to pretend that paying for sex isn't much cheaper than paying for being betrothed to an incognito prostitute wife. I'll be going into more detail in the days to come, but these videos are meant to provide survivalist rhetoric to the masses of men. I'm not here to debate. I'm done debating. I have everything I need to avoid getting caught up in the matriarchy. This video and the ones to come are for the many men, and specifically the young men that email me, thanking me for helping them see clearly what they've naturally always suspected. This isn't for feminists, and it isn't for men sitting in wait for women to have some grand epiphany and waltz back into the kitchen so that we can be provider workhorses again and continue on playing house like nothing ever happened. It's for men that want control over their own lives and destiny, and for men that wish to be free. More survivalist rhetoric to come.